Hi, welcome to the Alzheimer's Association. This is the presentation Basics of Alzheimer's and Dementia for LGBT Care Partners. My name is Edie Yao. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion from the Northern California and Northern Nevada chapter. This is our presentation we've created specifically for individuals who are caring for someone with Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, and we'll be touching on some issues that are related to same-sex relationships, as they may be unique or different from heterosexual relationships. And I want to introduce our speaker for the day. David Troxell is the co-author of Best Friends Approach to Alzheimer's Care. I highly recommend you check out this book. It's great for anyone who's interested in Alzheimer's care. He also was the executive director of an Alzheimer's Association chapter, specifically the Santa Barbara chapter. David Troxell is a renowned speaker and expert in Alzheimer's care. If you'd like to contact him directly, you'll find his website address, bestfriendsapproach.com. And we are delighted to have him as our speaker for this presentation. So let me turn it over to David.
Well, thank you very much, Edie. It's always great to support the Alzheimer's Association on this important topic. And in addition to my writing and work in the field of Alzheimer's disease and other dementia, like many people I'm sure who will be listening to this presentation, I've also been a family care partner for my mom, Dorothy, who passed away with Alzheimer's disease in 2009. So like so many of us, I've traveled the journey personally as well as professionally, so it's great to talk about this topic, and we'll just jump right in. As we think about the impact of Alzheimer's disease and caregiving, it's been very important for me to make sure, particularly when I was with the Alzheimer's Association and even in my current work, we recognize that the definition of family is changing. We have such diversity in our world and in the United States today, and I think it's very important that we support care partners and persons with dementia like Rob and Jordan. You'll meet some other voices from the LGBT community in this presentation, and talk about not only some of the broad brushstrokes, the important things that affect any person who's caring for a person with dementia, but also some of the unique issues when you're a gay and lesbian couple, or if you're a gay person caring for one of your relatives or friends or family members. So let's jump in, and we'll talk about in this presentation the objectives being discussing what is Alzheimer's disease and dementia, how to take care of yourself, the medical, legal, and financial concerns, and we'll have a lot of good information about that topic. Fortunately, so many good things are happening in that arena compared to a few years ago. I think that the basic rights for gay people in terms of our courts are going the right direction. End-of-life care, which is a topic that I don't think gets enough discussion in any community. And then finally, community resources. So let's start off and talk about Alzheimer's disease. Having worked in this field about 25 or 30 years, I'm just in so many ways impressed with the tremendous progress we've made. I remember when I began working in the 1980s at the University of Kentucky Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. If I told people I worked for the Alzheimer's Center, people would say, "Alzheimer's, what's that?" Well, it's amazing how now so many people know about this disease, and there's a lot to celebrate. At the same time, there's a lot that we need to keep pushing for because, for example, it's been over 10 years now since we've had a new FDA-approved drug for Alzheimer's disease or other dementia. So we have a lot to learn, a lot to work with. But here are at least a few basics for the purposes of this presentation. What is dementia? Well, dementia to me is an umbrella term. It's a global term for any of this loss of cognitive functioning, particularly that loss that's serious enough to interfere with your daily life. So, perhaps somebody who, used to be pretty meticulous about their bills and now they're bouncing checks and not managing their finances. Maybe they're getting lost in familiar neighborhoods, not able to do the things they've once enjoyed. And this umbrella of dementia, it isn't just the memory of forgetfulness. It's also language and processing and problem solving, navigation, finding your way around, the sense of place and purpose, behavior, not with everybody, but some of the dementias impact personality and mood, and of course planning and organizing as well. When I think about the word dementia, by the way, one of my favorite analogies comes from a writer from Canada named Carol Bowlby Sifton. And Carol describes the word dementia like the word soup. You know, it's a broad category. There's chicken noodle, there's mushroom, there are all these different kinds of soups. And that's a good way of thinking about the word dementia, a broad term, and Alzheimer's is probably the chicken noodle, one of the kinds of flavors of dementia. The next slide, I guess I've already turned to it, the 10 warning signs. I understand, and maybe Edie can clarify later, but I understand this is probably one of the most popular downloads from the Alzheimer's Association website. I think it was updated a couple of years ago. And I really like this slide. It's a great one to share with your family or your staff, with other professionals, particularly if somebody's concerned about a family member or friend or client and how they're doing. Well, here are some of the things to look for. Memory changes that disrupt daily life, challenges in planning or solving problems, difficulty completing familiar tasks, confusion of time and place, trouble with visual images and spatial relationships, new problems with words and speaking or writing, misplacing things, although that's something I always am doing, so I'm a little worried about that one, decreased or poor judgment, withdrawal from work or social activities, and changes in mood and personality. Now, I won't go through every one of these in great detail, but I thought I'd share with you just a few that I think maybe don't get talked about enough. We all know, I think, about the memory piece, particularly short-term memory with Alzheimer's disease. But I think number 2 is one that's important for us as family members to recognize. I still see families saying, you know, I'm explaining to my mother why she has to give up driving, or I'm telling my dad, you know, here are the 18 reasons why I need to manage his finances. Well, you know, when someone's cognitively healthy, you can argue and debate and explain. But when somebody has dementia, you need to change your approach because they can't always figure these things out. Number 4, again, people have issues around time and place. You know, if you say, I'll be back in an hour, Mom, she may not really know whether that's an hour or a day. It's really tough. Visual images, if you've ever seen a person, you know, particularly later in dementia where they pick up a fork and they miss their mouth, that type of thing. That's one reason why falls are a particular concern with dementia. Language, you know, that's always been so sad for me, but dementia often impacts the language centers of the brain, so people have trouble, you know, understanding what we're saying to them and making themselves understood. Number 8, I want to lift up because that's a very important one because, you know, people with dementia, they can really become victims of unscrupulous people, sometimes even family members, for financial abuse and other things. So if you have a friend or family member with dementia, you want to be very, very vigilant to make sure that that's not happening, that they're not making poor choices. And again, number 9, maybe you have somebody who's always gone to the farmers markets on weekends and, you know, washed their car and gone to the Wednesday poker club, and now they're not doing these things. This kind of withdrawal can also be a concern. So these are the 10 warning signs, and I think they are a very good training tool for staff as well as very good for families. So the next slide, we will begin the first of a few of our short videos just to hear some voices of dementia and caregiving.
The Alzheimer's, dementia, and a touch of a very unique type of Parkinson's as well, has impacted my visual judgment. I have difficulty judging space, whether I'm walking up and down stairs or in between cars, or even making left-hand turns. So the car that I used to own had a lot of nicks and scrapes and bumps in it by the time I ended up no longer driving.
So here Lou just describes one of those symptoms from the list about how visual spatial impact happens. I think one thing that's important, because, you know, families will often say to me, you know, what can I expect and what will happen next and how long will this go? And the truth is that when you've met one person with Alzheimer's disease, you've kind of just met one person with Alzheimer's. Everybody has their own experience. Lou is somebody who's really been an extraordinary volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association, and he's very reflective and has insight about what's happening to him, but not everybody shares those skills. So let's talk about, again, this world of dementia. And I think the important thing to highlight from this slide is that there are some significant differences between the dementias. And when you go to the doctor nowadays, if the doctor just says, your partner has dementia, you want to challenge that a bit. You want to know what kind of dementia. You want to make sure someone's had a good medical evaluation. And fortunately, through the Alzheimer's Association in California, or for any of the Alzheimer's societies around the country, you can often get good information about where to go for a workup, and there are many university medical memory disorder clinics. But on the first arrow there, reversible dementias, I do think it's important to recognize that people sometimes have treatable conditions. Maybe they're deeply depressed, and that can often mimic Alzheimer's disease or other dementia. Maybe they're taking their pills all wrong, and particularly someone living alone at home, maybe they're malnourished, B12 deficiencies, things like that. So you always want to check to make sure there's not a treatable issue going on. Vascular dementia is probably the second or third leading cause of dementia. I've read different reports on that. And very simply put, it's that interruption of blood flow to the brain, what we used to call this multi-infarct or mini-stroke dementia. I'm very much oversimplifying. There's lots of good information on the web about that. But this is something that can often be seen on scans and is significant. There's a dementia called mixed dementia where you have vascular plus Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease we know so much about. I'll talk about that in the next slide. Again, particularly affecting memory, thinking, judgment. It starts in the area of the brain called the hippocampus. I guess we have two, the hippocampi, and it can be a very slow, progressive situation. Lewy body dementia, I think, is really quite interesting. I was recently at Mayo Clinic in Florida, and they told me that I think 40% of their recent diagnoses had been Lewy body. So again, we think this is actually pretty significant, second or third leading cause. Lewy body dementia looks a lot like Parkinson's. People sort of have a bit of movement disorders. But the really telltale symptom there are hallucinations. People with Lewy body dementia will often have visual hallucinations. They'll see little children who aren't there and talking with them, or see a dog or a cat. The hallucinations can also be smells, the olfactory hallucinations, or hearing, the auditory. So if someone is having these visual hallucinations, that can be a sign of Lewy body disease. And the thing about Lewy body dementia, I think most of what we do for any person with dementia, how we support them by knowing and using their life story and keeping them socially active, all of that really counts. I have been told by my physician friends that Lewy body persons are often very sensitive to psychotropic meds. You want to be careful there. Frontal temporal dementia, I think particularly for some of the professionals who are taking this class, very interesting in terms of how you look at people coming into your programs. Frontal temporal dementia is the only dementia, I believe, that affects more men than women. The peak age is 55 to 65. The number one marker here is behavioral change, personality change. Classically, people with frontal temporal dementia, they get very narcissistic. They eat a lot of sugar. They get outlandish. They lose sort of the empathy toward others. My nickname for this is the me disease. It can be very, very challenging. Again, one of the wrinkles around knowing the different kinds of dementia, people with frontal temporal dementia often don't do well on the classic cholinesterase inhibitor drugs like Aricept, Exelon, and Razodine. So those are people that you want to assess carefully and perhaps not utilize those medications for. Bottom line, if you remember my analogy, the world of soup, you want to ask the doctor, what is the soup of the day, what kind of soup? Every chicken noodle is dementia, but not every dementia is chicken noodle, just like every Alzheimer's disease is dementia, but not every dementia is Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's, again, I won't take a lot of time on this because I think it's so well known, but I think the biggest piece I want to just lift up here is really the last bullet, that this is a huge issue. And I think that I've read, the next 25 or 30 years, if we don't have a cure for this disease, there'll be 15 million Americans with Alzheimer's. So we have a lot of work to do. There was a New England Journal of Medicine article that came out in 2013 that also described Alzheimer's disease as the most expensive disease, even more than heart and cancer. So for those of you who are family members, there are a lot of people, even within a few blocks of your home, who are having similar issues. Let's take a look at another voice of Alzheimer's and caregiving.
Art loves to read. He loved to read, and that was probably one of the first things that was quite noticeable, is that he couldn't concentrate. He would always have 2 or 3 books going at all times, and I began to notice that the bookmarks weren't really changing. And I would see him put the book down, or he would say, I can't concentrate, or I can't remember what I just read. And he would have to keep going back a few pages and picking it up. So that was a very obvious sign.
So, of course, the families are often the first people to notice that something is going on. And even in this high-tech era, again, my friends who are geriatricians and neurologists say that the family care partner story is often the most compelling piece of it. I was at a meeting a few months ago, and one son said that his mother had gone to the post office mistaking it for a bank and tried to cash a check, and when the postal clerk said, ma'am, this isn't Bank America, you can't cash your check here, she apparently had just a meltdown and accused him of stealing her money, and those are the types of things even a dramatic story like that we do hear with Alzheimer's disease. So in terms of wrapping up our first segment, there's an awful lot of great information about these various dementias. We're just lightly touching on it in this webinar. I encourage you to go to the Alzheimer's Association website where you'll find out a lot more. Now let's talk about an issue that's probably closer to home for many people on this call. How do you take care of yourself as a family or professional care partner? Well, when we think about just roles in general, my understanding is that really the number one caregivers in the U.S. are the daughters and the daughter-in-laws. This tends to classically hit a lot of women. When we look at the LGBT community, it perhaps might be a little bit different, because I know that in many families you might have, for example, a gay son who doesn't have a family, doesn't have a lot of children obligations, so sometimes he becomes the person that the family looks at. With this role of being the care partner, I kind of wish that everybody could be in bullet number one, that you'd have this choice. The truth is that sometimes life just happens, and you may not have a choice. It just may be something you have to do. It may be something that the family, again, perceives the obligation, that daughter-in-law, or maybe a gay child. And again, as we think about this role, you have a spouse, a partner, a parent. It's amazing how many people care for friends in the U.S. I was up in Seattle, I remember a year or so ago, and there was a couple who had lovingly cared for the gay man who lived next door, who they had befriended for many years. He had no family, and they were his primary care partner. So as we look at this, I think ultimately one of the things we need to encourage our families to look at is, what are their resources? How do they have the disposition to do this, and how can we shore them up and educate them? I think there are some people who just shouldn't try to do this, who may not have that knack or skill. But a lot of us do things we never thought we'd be able to do when Alzheimer's hits, particularly if we can get education, training, and support. But certainly dual roles are common, not only in the straight community but in the gay community, and you often are having to do a lot of things in your life within your relationships. This causes stress and challenges. Now, let's talk about stress, because I think we don't really discuss enough how really tough being a care partner is, financially, emotionally, and physically. And of course, there is some research that says that often the healthy care partner, particularly with elders, might even die before the person with dementia, because you're the one who's having to worry so much about managing daily life. So as we look at this warning sign of stress, I particularly like this slide that the Alzheimer's Association put together, and I like the fact that they kind of, only in California, we talk about mind and body, emotions, behavior, we use that great language, but it's very important. So I think perhaps starting with the most black and white, what is your body telling you? Are you constantly tired? Are you having headaches and muscle pain? Are you having physical symptoms of stress? Certainly something that you should take a look at. The mindfulness material, how is your mood? Are you in a state of despondency, traveling this caregiving journey, worry, indecisions, negativity? How is it going for you? And of course, emotions and behavior. Are you losing weight? Are you not sleeping? Are you drinking or smoking? Or are you accident prone? So, again, I want to stress that there are people who approach this caregiving role with great flair and finesse and almost come into their own with it. But most of us have a lot of angst about it as well. And I think just to name it, to identify it, hopefully go to a good support group, I think all of this can be very helpful. An analogy that I've used in my own books, I think other people have used it too, I always think about the airplane where they say, if the oxygen masks drop, put it on your dependent, put it on yourself first, pardon me, and then your dependent second, because we need the oxygen to breathe in order to, help our dependent. So I think that one key here is if you are, if you look at the slide and you're circling a bunch of things in your mind or on paper, that means you need to get some help. And we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but so often even the best and most dedicated care partners wait to use services. Don't fall into that trap. It's very important to not try to do this all alone. So how do you cope with stress? Again, I think I've covered a few of these things. Certainly talk to your own doctor, work on your diet, exercise. There's some really very interesting research now on exercise in the brain, and there's evidence that people who exercise regularly may actually get Alzheimer's disease later in life than people who don't. And also, if you have Alzheimer's or other dementia, perhaps exercising regularly may even slow the process down. So this is something you can even do with the person with dementia, and something important for you. Increase the me time, probably easier said than done for even those of us who have regular jobs and lives. But if you can, take that few minutes to go to Starbucks and have a coffee, sit in the patio, play with the dog, very important. I'm going to skip ask for support, come to that last, but again, relaxation techniques, yoga, Tai Chi, all of that, very important. The asking for support, very essential. And I think that often, again, quite candidly, people will let you down. I mean, I hear from many, family care partners that that they've been disappointed in their faith community, disappointed in their friends and family for not helping out. My best advice here is be very specific. Brother Bob, could you make a Costco run for me? Or, oh, the neighbor says, is there something I can do? Well, actually, would you be willing to run to the store and get me this if I give you my list? Would you come and sit with Dad for 2 hours while I go to the gym or get some exercise? So encouraging families to be specific, ask for help, I think are very, very important. Let's take a look at another short video.
But don't beat yourself up. You can only do what you can do. You're human, and take care of yourself. I tell all my clients, you take care of yourself. Make sure you eat, sleep. Make sure I bought a motorcycle. I go riding. I've ridden for years, but Jen never wanted me to have a bike until recently. She said, get a bike and go out and do your thing. Do your thing. Don't stop living. Don't believe there's not a life after, even though you will. You will. You will think everything stopped, but yet the world out there is happy. At least you think it is, and you're not. And you go through the resentment. But the one thing I can honestly say, I never resent Jen for it. But I resent the illness. I resent that we're being robbed. So, and it's okay. Allow all that. If you want to cry, cry. If you need to even show emotion in front of the person that has it disease, share your emotions to a degree with them. Include them with what you're feeling.
David, I should just share.
Yes, thank you. Oh, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I should just share that this is Tracy, who's caring for her partner Jen. They recently got married, but yeah, Jen has younger onset Alzheimer's, and Tracy's been very generous in sharing her story.
Well, thank you, Edie, and thank you, Tracy. I really appreciate some of the things you said there about not being too hard on yourself, because, again, I think it's almost a characteristic of some of the best caregivers. They may do 95 things correct and well and successfully, and the 2 or 3 things they screw up or don't do well, they just obsess over and beat themselves up over. So I like the fact that she has a friendly give and take with her partner. I like the fact that they're sharing feelings, and the fact that she has her motorcycle to get out there and blow off some stress. So again, just to recap kind of the piece about stress management, I think that a lot of, I think, stress can be avoided when you learn all you can about dementia. Don't wait to use services. Be part of the community. Have some of that honest sharing. Be specific about your needs. All of those things make a big difference. And now we'll turn to medical, legal, and financial concerns. And as I said in my brief introductory remarks, I think this is an area where, thank goodness, we've made a lot of progress, but we still have work to do as a gay community. And certainly from what I gather anecdotally, maybe if you live in Northern California where this webinar is based, you might have a very different experience with providers and with services and even with the legal system than you would in some parts of the U.S. or internationally. So this is an area that I think it's important to develop your savvy and sophistication and be prepared for as a LGBT care partner. Let's look at the next video.
David, there's a video clip here that we're going to share, and it's Gene, who we saw earlier talk about his husband, Art, and I was trying to remember, why did we put this clip right here in this lineup? And, I think in many cases we find that gay partners, they may go back in the closet at this time of life because they're fearful of either being discriminated or just not getting the services that they need. And so we had asked Gene, are there any differences that you noticed being in a same-sex relationship caring for Art? So this is what he has to say.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Edie.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that strikes me is that oftentimes friends, more distant family members, or people that you meet, acquaintances, I get the comment a lot that, oh, Gene, you're so good to take care of Art. And it just strikes me as an odd thing to say to someone who's married to his partner and who's been with his partner for 28 years. I've never heard anybody say that to a heterosexual spouse. Oh, you're so good to take care of your husband. Or, I think most people would do exactly what I'm doing. If you love somebody, you care. That's what love is. At least that's how I define it. So I think that's...
Well, very good, and how great that he's here to educate, particularly our professionals on the call about even just the importance of language and becoming sensitive to the community. And I love what he said, that of course we're here for our husbands and wives and partners, just like anybody would be, we hope, in the care partner role. So let's take a look at some of these important medical documents and discuss, as we wind down our seminar today, any particular angles that relate to our community. I have to say, and Edie, I'm sure you found this in your work, it still shocks me when I meet families and care partners and people, whether they're caring for somebody with dementia or not, who don't have their affairs in order. Somehow we talk so much about, powers of attorney and living trusts and wills, but it's amazing how many people still don't have this done. And one reason I like to focus on this when you're facing this journey of dementia is that the good news, maybe the bad news with dementia is so much is beyond your control. But the good news about dementia is because it is slow and progressive, so often you can get some of these foundational pieces done and off your list. And of course, you want to do them early when hopefully the person with dementia still has some legal capacity to make decisions, to sign documents. And it goes without saying that waiting is a very, very dangerous thing, because if the person ends up not being legally competent, it really does narrow down your choices. So the first one we'll discuss is that durable power of attorney for health care. Again, the idea being that you want to execute those documents to say ideally what you would want if something happened to you, and everything from end-of-life decisions and all of those things, naming that agent to represent you, particularly in same-sex couples. I think this is very essential because we know that sometimes the family dynamics are a lot tougher than in straight relationships. You might have family members who've been really anti the relationship, in denial. family members who feel like they're not even recognizing the relationship. So without those documents, you could have a situation where a longtime care partner could lose control. Again, things have changed somewhat since marriage has come in so many states in the U.S. But I would encourage everybody to have this durable power of attorney for health care. The advance directive, again, a similar document saying what you would want for end-of-life issues. Having lost both my mother and my father in the last few years, it was very helpful for me to have these documents, and even though I knew them so well, to have their words to guide me. And I have to say that a number of times the hospital, even eventually the funeral home, wanted to see these documents, so it was very important to have them. The physician orders for life-sustaining treatment, again, it may vary. I know there are people from different states here, but this is something, again, that you should talk to your local physician about. Often if someone's admitted to a hospital, again, they'll ask you about these advance directives. And I think if I can maybe take it slightly back from the legalese here, perhaps the first step is just to talk as a family and let your friends and family know what you want. Because if we don't share these statements now, again, even a simple document can be something that becomes a source of dispute. So all of these things are very important to make sure that with this, you will not have any trouble with hospital visitation or release of medical information, because nowadays, many of our medical doctors and hospitals, if you don't have a marriage certificate or these documents, you may be excluded from important visits and decision making. So again, the financial documents, we talked about the healthcare documents, the durable power of attorney for finances. This is something that can be very simple, but it's also very powerful. You want to give a trusted party the ability to make financial decisions for you, particularly if you've been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. But I think, again, all of us should have this document with a trusted party. That person legally has an obligation to work in your best interest. But let me tell you that it can be very hard to undo the damage if you give it to someone who isn't going to represent your best interest. So that, along with a will, with living trust, depending on your financial circumstances, and some pre-planning of funeral wishes are all key elements of good care. So now let's take another short video view from one of our wonderful champions.
Yeah, and this is Tracy again, and just sharing a great example of how she and Jen did get all of their legal matters in order.
Thank you, Edie.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we thought, why not take care of us? We have long-term health care. We went to an attorney. Nothing can take anything away from us. Jen and I just went last week to see Dino. If you need a great attorney, got a great attorney. And she signed all over her rights already. So I can sign off if I needed to sell one of our rentals. I don't have to have Jen's permission. So we basically are legally tied to each other and capable of making decisions for each other more so than any married couple. We took care of that. And like I said, we already have long-term health care.
Well, thank you for those remarks. And I will say that I've been told by attorneys that even husbands and wives or same-sex couples, that you want to execute these documents for each other, because even with that marriage certificate, you may not be able to sell a piece of real estate or have issues getting rid of certain assets without those additional powers of attorney. So let's now talk about legal protections. And again, this is an area where I have to say there's a lot of good news to share. I think now clearly our federal government is here for us as a gay community, prohibiting discrimination against people with Alzheimer's disease and dementia who are gay and lesbian in nursing homes, and in California demanding that people have training about LGBT issues. There are a lot of good things to share. And I know we have a national audience for these webinars, so I think the most important suggestion I would make to you is to talk to your local Alzheimer's Association or Area Agency on Aging or elder law attorney to learn a bit more about how these legal protections can work in your favor. But I feel that history is on our side and that good things are happening in this area to prevent discrimination. I don't know, Edie, would you like to add any additional resources or comments to this slide?
I think later we have just a few websites that you can look at. Certainly for professionals, there's the National Center for LGBT Aging that is an excellent resource.
Right.
And yeah, as you pointed out, I think we're making some strides in some just legal protections like in nursing homes. But, it's important that people recognize that there are these legal protections so that they know that they can ask and advocate for themselves.
Right, and you know what, Edie, I think that's almost a universal as a care partner, and I'm kind of sad that it still has to be a universal, but ultimately I think we all have to become advocates for the person with dementia, for ourselves as care partners, because even though a provider might be altruistic, they might mean well, we need to advocate for support, for everything from more services into our community, or advocate for a good diagnosis, advocate for physical therapy referrals. I think there's still some physicians who, perhaps say, well, he has Alzheimer's. I don't know that that's, he needs to do the physical therapy. No. We want to keep people as physically active and as fit as possible and support this idea of equal rights.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So now we'll turn to another critical topic, end-of-life care. And, of course, I love this next slide, to plan ahead and start the discussion early. I think we've already discussed this a little bit in the webinar, but, I find that in the U.S., for some reason, I think culturally, maybe in other parts of the world too, people are very hesitant to talk about these end-of-life issues within families. And yet, when I talk to individuals, it's amazing. A lot of elders particularly want to talk about it. Their children are sometimes more squeamish about it than the elders themselves. They want to say, what their rights and expectations are. And of course, not everybody, but most people, don't want, they don't want the quantity of life to trump the quality of life. So let's keep discussing this topic here. Okay, so certainly I'm going to focus in on that middle slide there and mention the power of hospice. This whole movement around the country has really been quite extraordinary, and many communities have nonprofit hospices as well as for-profit hospices. But if you're looking at end-of-life issues, I think this is one area where it's powerful to begin this dialogue with a hospice group and certainly involve hospice in your family members' care. People can, when they qualify for hospice, it can open up a lot of services for you, everything from somebody to come in and help you with a shower, to clergy, to counseling, to a social worker, to a nurse. All of these things are very important. So as we look at this whole idea of comfort care, I have to say a huge thing for me is avoiding pain. Now, again, if somebody who is cognitively normal, maybe they have a end-of-life diagnosis with a cancer, they can often tell us when they're in pain and tell us what's happening. People with dementia, pain often goes unreported. They can't always tell us what's happening. So this is something that, again, with palliative care, trying to make sure that we're respecting their dignity, watch for pain, keep them comfortable, all of this becomes very important. There's also a lot of good material out there about end-of-life, even activities or end-stage activities. And for me, it's very important when a person has dementia to, let them be outside as much as possible and be in the sun, listen to music, have some tactile touch, have lots of friendly hugs and smiles around them, let the cat jump on their lap and let them pet the cat. I think all of these things are very, very important. And with bereavement, I think what's really tough for gay and lesbian people is sometimes you'll go to a group and you're the only gay person there if you're going through a bereavement process or if you're in a bereavement group. So again, this is an area I think where hopefully you can identify your own social network, your group of friends who can be there for you and be supportive. And I think many, many hospices and groups now are even doing LGBT support groups, things like that. So we do have some groups that are supportive of our community. Speaking of community resources, let's run through a few key areas of support for any care partner. And this slide, I think, is pretty self-explanatory, that there are a lot of services out there, and it's very important to be aggressive, identify them, because some of these services can really be life-saving. Everything from meal delivery to housekeeping services, support groups. Nowadays they have online support groups, certainly, but I think if you can find a group of people to sit with and visit with, once a month, twice a month, once a week, all of those are very, very powerful. The other great thing about support groups that I don't think gets discussed enough is support group members, they can say things to each other that professionals can't say to them. They can say, he's a great doctor, don't go to him. They can say, this is a fantastic home care agency, and they're very in tune with the LGBT community, very supportive of our community. And so I think a lot of that is something you can learn at a support group as well. In-home care, I'm a big fan of in-home care. What I always like to remind people is interview carefully. I think most people recommend you use some kind of agency for bonding and insurance purposes and payroll taxes, but try to find someone lively and fun, somebody who will engage the person, take them for walks, reminisce about the softball trophies in the house, or go through the travel scrapbooks together. You don't want someone just sitting there and watching television. I think socialization is such an important factor of great dementia care. And again, as we look at long-term care, we'll talk about that in a moment, but trying to find a community where staff are trained in LGBT issues, where it will be a welcoming environment. And I think I've said this too many times, Edie, in this conversation, but I will say that families often wait and wait and wait, and then when they start the day program or have the in-home worker or go to the group, they say, why didn't I do that sooner? So I think this is something to model. And another reason to use services I don't think we talk about enough with dementia care is that the person benefits. The care partner benefits from the respite or the break or the being with other care partners. But if you just try to keep the person with dementia at home 24/7, you might be the most dedicated, wonderful care partner, but that person's getting isolated. So I'm a big fan of using services because it brings other people into the social network for the person. So let's take a look at some LGBT affirming resources, and of course all of these groups have great websites these days. SAGE is a wonderful group that does advocacy for elders who are LGBT. I encourage you to check out their website. I think it's maybe sage.org. I'm not sure of the exact website, but you can find it through Google. And that's a very kind of classic, resource-rich, very informative website. The National Resource Center on LGBT Aging, again, much more focused on human rights, legal rights for our community. So that's an area, again, where if you're having trouble, you can probably use that organization to help represent you or give you some ideas of local resources, attorneys, people who can support you. NCLrights.org, Navigating the System, a Know Your Rights Guide for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender elders in California, another terrific resource, and the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association. So these are just some key areas. So if you are a member of the community and you're starting this probably long journey of being a care partner, I think all of these are great resources for you. So here, let's get to the nitty-gritty. Let's say you are looking for a assisted living community for your partner or for your mom or dad. The person you're placing may be gay, and maybe you have a relationship with them, but also maybe it's your straight mom, and you want to know, hey, if you come in as a gay person, will they be welcoming to you? It kind of cuts a lot of different ways. So I think it's important to ask if there is an explicit LGBT policy. Do we talk about that with staff? Are you welcoming and affirming? Are there out staff and residents? I think, again, it can really help you understand, if the administrator, the director of nurses is openly gay, that makes you feel that this is an affirming community. And I have to say, even back in my own career when I was the director of the Alzheimer's Association in Santa Barbara, I remember early on, maybe 1994, 1995, a person came in who was gay and caring for his 30-year-plus relationship partner. And when he came in, you could see he was almost physically trembling with angst about whether he'd be welcomed. And, this was the mid-'90s. We maybe hadn't come quite as far back then as we have today. And when I let him know that I was gay, he wept. The idea that he'd found a home, a place where he could come, and my 20-plus staff and hundreds of volunteers, that we were a very affirming, welcoming association, and he ended up walking in our walks and being a great supporter of ours, because again, he felt like he could be welcome and part of the family. So have the staff been trained? Are intake forms inclusive? If you're filling out the intake form, does it say Mr. and Mrs.? Does it talk about same-sex couples? And if it doesn't, by the way, I wouldn't necessarily run out the door. I think ask them about it, and ask them if they consider changing the form, and test the relationship early. Are they going to be someone who is sensitive to you and your needs or not? And if not, that will tell you a message. And can same-sex couples share rooms? So all of these things come to a head. And I think depending on where you're located, you might have lots of providers who are there for you, and maybe you won't have providers who are necessarily initially inclusive. But I want to double back and say that I think times are changing, and maybe 10, 20 years ago, you might have had someone who, in a sense, almost slams the door in your face. I think nowadays people know that our community is growing and involved. A lot of people have gay sons, gay neighbors, gay friends. And I think perhaps you can, I hate the fact that you might have to be the first person, but maybe you can lead that particular adult day program or assisted living community or in-home agency. You can lead them in the right direction and help be an educator for them.
They're coming into my space. I want to make sure that they're okay with who I am in terms of just sexual orientation alone, let alone be in a relationship. Over 32 years, that might be problematic for some people. And they're coming to my home to help me, and I know that they're trained to treat everyone equally. But if I can have somebody in my home who's got a sense of humor and who is non-judgmental and affirmative of LGBT issues, I think I would much prefer that, if at all possible, than someone I would need to be cautious around.
Edie, do you want to comment on that clip?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, well, that's Lou Bordiso again, and just talking about his own experience hiring, home care providers. And, here he has been living in his home, and yet he feels he has to be cautious. So, it just affects everything for him.
And the thing I wanted to say, when you think about Alzheimer's disease, it affects everybody. And so at one level, one thing I hope that is very healing and affirming about discussing Alzheimer's disease with any person, whatever their background or belief system, I think maybe that's what we all have in common if we're facing this disease, and hopefully that will build bridges in many, many ways. So thank you again for being part of this great seminar, and I hope it's been a great seminar. And thank you, Edie, for you and your team inviting me to be part of this presentation sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association. I remain a longtime supporter and volunteer of the association, and delighted to support them as they have their 24/7 helpline, support groups, educational programs, great online services, and of course even safety services around the Medic Alert Safe Return system. And locally as well as nationally, there are some online resources through the association for the LGBT community. Perhaps, Edie, you could comment on that last website.
Sure. We have a message board available for care partners. So, if you're interested, feel free to log on there. But certainly there are lots of other resources, but this one is for Alzheimer's care partners.
Thank you. And of course, we have to put a plug in for two really critical areas of our work at the Alzheimer's Association. We hope that all of you will join the various associations in the annual Walk to End Alzheimer's. And we also encourage you to join our advocacy efforts I believe that last year Alzheimer's disease was one of the few areas in Congress with this divisive Congress to actually get more money, not that we have enough, but it was quite an amazing bipartisan victory. And I have to say the Alzheimer's Association has been particularly effective in their advocacy at the national level, and many of you have been involved at the state level as well. So we encourage you to join our advocacy efforts as well. So again, thank you for being part of this presentation. There's the Alzheimer's Association website, and I hope that all of you have a successful journey as care partners for you and your friends and family with Alzheimer's disease and other dementia, and can find that we can lift the person up and have a lot of moments of joy and happiness despite the tough times that can come with an Alzheimer's disease diagnosis.
And thank you very much, David, for being our presenter. Along with our website, if you would like to reach David directly, you can go to his website at bestfriendsapproaches.com at the beginning. So thank you again. This concludes our seminar.